Welcome back to another edition of After Hours. We are here starting off 2021, so we've had a few weeks off, but we are back, and we started our series Authentic 2 today, where we're looking at the letter of 2 John. And in John's writings, particularly his 3 letters, the idea of what it means to be an authentic Christian, what the authentic faith looks like, what an authentic life would look like, are very clear and central. And so we're going to be covering this for a number of weeks. But as I mentioned today, there's a question right up front because the letter begins, the elder to the chosen lady and her children. And so the questions are, who is the elder and who are the chosen lady and her children? Well, I'll look at each of these briefly. First off, the question of the elder. There are 2 main opinions. Number 1 is the idea that the elder is simply an older man, possibly a key leader, oftentimes thought to be named John, and he had the title of the elder. This would not be the Apostle John. This would be another John who was an older man, and he was highly respected, and he had the title of the elder. Now, you say, why would they think this? Well, there was an early church writer named Papias, and he left a fragment that dealt with some of this, and it's not really clear. His Greek's a little convoluted, but it may be that there was the idea that there was another man named John who went by the title of the elder that was around the area of Ephesus. Now, some scholars don't think that's what Papias was saying, but some think it is. And so they believe that this character, the elder, was actually this other John. And part of their reasoning is they say, well, look, if it were the Apostle John, he would write and say the Apostle, or the Apostle John, or John. He would give his name. He wouldn't simply go by the elder if it was truly the Apostle John. And thirdly, they say an apostle wouldn't actually call himself an elder because apostles are different than being elders in the early church. The apostles were kind of the highest there, so they wouldn't go by that title. Now, other scholars come back, and I agree with them, that actually, no, it is the Apostle John. And there are several reasons why I believe it's John. First, if you notice, John never puts his name in any of his writings. The Gospel of John doesn't indicate his name, nor does 1 John or 3 John. They don't indicate his name. The book of Revelation does have his name, but usually John goes by other things. Like throughout the Gospel, he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. He's got other ways, so it would actually be unusual for John to include his name here. Secondly, to the idea that apostles aren't elders, well, we know that's actually not the case. Apostles were elders. Now, they were a special set of elders, but for example, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1, Peter says, I, Peter, am writing to you elders, and I'm writing as a fellow elder. He uses it's actually one word in the Greek, sum presbyteros, which means fellow elder, together with you serving as an elder. And so the apostles did consider themselves elders. Elder was kind of the generic term for church leaders. Within that, apostles were included, and so John very well could use that. Thirdly, if you notice here, John doesn't say an elder writing to the chosen lady, but the elder. It is highly likely that by the time John is penning this letter, 2 John, he is the only apostle left. We have references that he might be the last one. If you look in John chapter 21, church history tells us John was the last of the apostles left. In fact, he apparently lived so long that there were rumors that he was never going to die, which John has to kind of quell there in John 21. But nonetheless, he's referencing to himself as the elder. And if you think about this, if he's the last apostle, the last of the elders who were apostles, and the word elder actually originally just simply meant old man, you could see how John would take this title, the elder, and it would fit and make perfect sense in what he's doing. And furthermore, I mentioned that fragment of Papias earlier. You could easily read that fragment to indicate that there were the apostles, and then there were and the last apostle living is John, and he was known as the elder. it's possible you could read the Greek either way, and it's only a small fragment out of this letter. But I think it's at least as likely, if not more likely, that it is indicating that John was known as the elder. And finally, every early manuscript we have of 2 John refers to it as 2 John. And the early church tradition was that the Gospel of John and 1 John were both clearly written by the Apostle John. And so it would seem to indicate that the majority testimony from the early church is that this, in fact, is the writing of John. And I would add that the theology is so similar between 2 John and 1 John, and in fact, all three letters of John and the Gospel of John. They clearly are using terms that John likes and referencing, so it just appears that it's the Apostle John. Now, secondly, there's this question of, well, who is the chosen lady and her children? And again, there's a couple of different options. Some people say, well, it's just a specific woman and her children. John doesn't give her name, and possibly that's because, you know, they didn't want to call out the names because Christians were under persecution, but it's just a chosen lady and a specific lady that he's writing to. And the literal language is chosen lady and her children. There's nothing unusual about these words. They're just the words that one would use for that. And in fact, most letters are written to individuals. And so it could be that John is writing a letter to a lady and her biological children. But I don't think that's the case. And in fact, most scholars don't think it's the case. And there are several reasons why that I would take it to be it's actually referring to a local church and the individual members of that church. First, if you notice in verse 1, he says, you know, that I love you in the truth. And not only I, but everyone who knows the truth loves you. Well, first off, why would we say that this woman was so well known in all these other areas? There's nothing to indicate that there's just one individual lady in the church there or in the area that's receiving this letter that was so well known, unless it was like, for example, Mary, the mother of Jesus. We don't have any record that there would be anybody that was that well known. But the idea that it was a local church that was well known, that makes perfect sense. Secondly, if you look at most of the instructions in the letter, first off, they're given in the plural. Secondly, they seem to make more sense regarding a church. And this is going to be carried even further in the letter of 3 John, where we have a very similar greeting. And yet, what we're finding is there's a church leader named Diotrephes who is putting people out of the church, who's causing all kinds of problems. Well, similarly here in 2 John, the instructions, just read straightforwardly, make more sense if they are given to an entire church rather than a woman and a few of her children. This is, you know, the call to love and responding to all other believers, the call to obedience, to rejecting false teachers and not having them in with you. All of this actually makes more sense in the context of it being written to a local church. Thirdly, and I mentioned this briefly on Sunday, the children of your chosen sister also send greetings. Well, first off, it'd be a little bit strange if the sister there is a literal biological sister, and yet she's sending greetings through this other person rather than just writing directly. Why would that happen? But this reminds us very clearly of 1 Peter 5:13, where Peter, writing to the Christians spread throughout the region of Asia, similar region that John is writing to, says, you know, she who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you her greetings. Virtually everyone agrees this is the church in Rome sending greetings to the church over there in Asia. It's the same kind of language that's being used here. And if the sister is referring to a church a metaphorical way, it would be almost certain that the chosen lady is as well. Fourth, we look at the fact that 1 John and 2 John, the reason I've called it authentic too, is it basically is just picking up some of the same themes from 1 John and reminding the people of them. 1 John was clearly written to a church. It was not written to an individual. Everybody agrees with that. And it's a church under attack from heretics. And this seems to be the same situation. So it seems like John is just continuing it here, but the situation's probably even gotten worse. a number of the heretics are splitting up the churches. They're pulling people out of these churches that the elderly Apostle John is caring for. And so he's referring to the chosen lady, reminding her that even though these heretics who have rejected the truth, we're going to see that in a few weeks, the ways they've rejected who Jesus really is, they may be speaking against her, but no, she is the chosen lady. You are part of God's chosen people. This local church and these children here, your members, you are God's chosen people. And it's kind of John's way of underlining that fact. And then finally, the last area is that 3rd John's going to pick up and on the same themes, bringing them forward again, but dealing with heretical leaders in a local church. And everyone again agrees with that. So it only makes sense that 2nd John's kind of in this flow, dealing with the same things. And so what we're dealing with in this letter is not just a letter from one kind of unknown person to another unknown person that hasn't come down to us, but rather it is the aged Apostle John, probably the last of the apostles, who is now the elder, an old man who has seen Jesus be faithful down through the ages. He's writing to a church and individual members who are being pressured to abandon the Christian faith, to follow unauthentic ideas about what the faith is, to change and conform the faith. And John is writing to encourage them and tell them, you don't need to do that. You are actually God's elect people. Live like God's elect people. Hold on to the gospel. Hold on to the grace that was given to you in Christ Jesus. And so this letter is very appropriate to us because, my friends, if you are a believer, we here at Bay Ridge, we are part of the chosen lady. And we individually are the children of this chosen lady, the church that Jesus loves, the church that he has died for, the church that he gives his blessing to, and the church that he calls to hold on to the authentic faith. And so we'll be looking this coming Sunday at authentic truth as we talk about the importance of the truth in the gospel, and for us as the church, the people of God, to hold on to it. I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope you're experiencing the blessings of God each and every day as we launch into this new year. God bless.